Every house in the market right now is just every house. Straight cases and
Hi, Lawrence. How you doing? Good. You? Oh my God.
He would have to check it.
How's it going?
Because I'll sign off on the lines. Every time I have something, they have it up. Instead of through, you know, so.
Wish I could get this done.
Oh, that's right.
I didn't know it. That's right.
It's getting screwed up.
I guess you can sign it.
Already.
This one, I didn't fill it out for you this time. Yeah.
There's a lot of difference.
I'm going to Arizona Thursday morning. You guys are all.
Wow.
There's a week down there. You went the wrong way. I thought.
I know. I've been about 100 times. I should pop up and see you too. I appreciate the service you guys do.
That's how we're going to go out there.
Maybe just for the start. So he asked me to talk about it. Awesome. Thank you for having me.
So, you know,
Well, it looks like it's 5:30, so we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Thank you everyone for being here this evening. I hope everybody got the word that we're switching to 5:30, but they'll get used to that at some point in the near future. So again, thank you for everyone for being here. We'll begin with invocation by Pastor John Stone, Leading Church. John.
I can read, this is really briefly from 1 Timothy chapter 2. First of all, then I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. This is good, and it's pleasing in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you so much for our city council. Thank you for the service they render. Thank you, too, for the city that you've given us to live in here in North Platte. We pray for wisdom for them as they deliberate. Lord, I pray for open dialogue. I pray for honesty. Lord, for just a spirit of encouragement and joy even here tonight. God, we recognize that all truth is your truth, and so we pray that your spirit would guide today's proceedings. In Jesus' name, we are asking this. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Nestle.
Here.
Ashenfeld. Peterson.
Here.
Lucas.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Arnold.
Here.
Reaper.
Here.
Osborne.
Here. All right, just a quick reminder, I'd like to go over the meeting procedures this evening. If you've got a copy of your agenda, you'll see it at the top of the page. It says the public may address specific agenda items at the pleasure of the board. If recognized by the mayor, please state your name and address and limit remarks to 3 minutes or less. Out of respect to city employees, we request that any complaints or criticisms of employees not be in a public meeting. Concerns about employees should be brought to the attention of the city administrator or mayor. An individual in violation will be declared out of order. All right, we'll begin with, current copy of the Open Meetings Act of Nebraska is posted on the wall at the back of the council chambers. We'll begin with the consent agenda. All matters under the consent agenda are considered by the city council for routine and will be enacted by one motion. Any city council member may, however, remove an item from consent by request. All right, item number 1 is approved minutes of September 17, 2019. Item number 2, place on file ML&W reports from August of 2019. And item number 3, approved application by Nebraska Craft Brewers Guild for a special designated license on October 23, 2019 from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Ramada by Wyndham Sandhills Convention Center at 2102 South Jefferson Street for a tourism conference/testing reception. Item number 4, approval application by Aiden Enterprises LLC, Sutherland Longhorn Bar for a special designated license on November 9th, 2019 from 3 p.m. to 1 a.m. at the DNN Event Center, 501 East Walker Road for a wedding reception. Item number 5, approve mayor's appointment of James Nestle to the RSVP Advisory Board. Item number 6, authorize the sale of surplus vehicles and equipment at the next police impound auction to be held on October 13th, 2019. Item number 7, approve the purchase of 2019 John Deere 544 loader for the sanitation department from the Murphy Tractor Equipment Company in the amount of $157,000 after trade.
Move that we approve items 1 through 7 of the consent agenda. Need abstain the whole time.
And that motion passes. All right, regular agenda. Item number 8, public hearing and action on the resolution by the city of North Platte recommending approval of a redevelopment of the city of North Platte regarding the Iron Trail Industrial Park project, redevelopment plan of the city of North Platte for a property described as part of the southeast 1/4 of section 15, township 13 north, range 30 west of the 6th PM in the city of North Platte, Lincoln County, Nebraska, and shown as parcel ID number 0023926.70 in the records of the office of Lincoln County, Nebraska County Assessor. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Mike Jacobson, 3020 West Leota Street. I'm chairman of the North Platte Redevelopment Authority and here to represent Prateria, their project, which is what you just described. Prateria Ventures would be building, the plan would be to build, at least in this TIF plan, they're going to do at least 6 buildings, although the plan does shows 7 buildings. In all likelihood, they will be doing 7 buildings in phase 1. Phase 1's really all we're talking about tonight. Their plan would ultimately be to come back and do at least 1 more or 2 more phases in that area, assuming that these buildings are all absorbed. The uniqueness again of this project, it's being built out in the industrial park. They'd be purchasing land that's currently owned by the Development Corporation. So they'd be buying land. They would be using the TIF proceeds for land purchase, street, sewer, water development to develop out the site, and then some engineering, etc. They're projecting that their development cost that would be permissible under TIF would be $610,000. They're expecting to spend at least $3 million on the project, which would result likely in a tax assessed value somewhere north of $2.1 million. The uniqueness probably of this, well, let me just say that these buildings are all but one. At this point, they may have 1 pre-sold. The rest are all spec buildings. I can tell you when somebody comes to our town and wants to build pure spec, it's kind of hard to say no. There aren't a lot of people that have deep enough pockets to come in and build where the current economy is at and looking where the current national economy is at and say, I'm going to spend $3 million and build spec buildings and hope that I can find tenants or buyers. So, but that's exactly what they're doing. When we look at the project itself, I would just simply say that under the regular TIF process, as you all know, I've been through the process before with you, they would be funding the $610,000 up front to fund the bond. We would then give those proceeds back to them as a grant along with the bond, which would give them the rights to the incremental tax payments that they will make on the buildings that they build. So again, the beauty of TIF is developer funds the bond, developer receives the proceeds from the bond that they funded, and then the developer pays the taxes on that property, a portion of which is pulled off and sent back to them to pay off the bond. The only uniqueness to this particular one is some of you might be saying on $3 million investment or a tax assessed value of just north of 2.1, just under $2.2 million, how do you come up with a $610,000 bond? Doesn't that seem like a fairly large bond? Again, let me remind you of the math that we walked through before on TIF bonds. It's a zero-sum game from the standpoint that we have a fixed amount of revenue that's going to be generated from that investment, and that's going to be determined by the mill levy and the tax valuation. And so whatever the incremental increase is in taxes, that's what they're going to have flowing back to them. So then when we size the bond, what we start with is what's the interest rate, and then what's the time frame, and what's the incremental amount that we're expecting to generate every year. And then it becomes a math problem. You just solve for how much debt can I take on, or how big a bond can I write so that it can be paid off with principal and interest over 15 years with the funds coming from that incremental tax piece. And the answer on this one is to get the $610,000, the interest rate has to be 0. Now, we've never done a 0 bond before, but I don't care. It's their money. I don't care if you want to get a 0 return on your bond or a 10% return on your bond. I'm just going to move the bond size to whatever you want the interest rate to be. Doesn't really matter. We're going to give them that amount of money. We're going to give them $610,000 over the next 15 years from the taxes that they pay that gets split off. So yeah, the bond could be smaller if they assigned, would be smaller if they assigned an interest rate to it. That's the only unique thing to the project. This, of course, would be the beginning of what we expect to be a significant amount of investment by the chief company overall. And we're anxious to get started. They're anxious to come out of the ground. This has been through planning, it's been through the COA, and now comes back to the city council for approval. And I'll just stop there and see, Mike Bacon is not here, so I had to kind of imitate him a little bit, so I'll stammer around a little bit, and then I'll ask if the developer would like to speak to it at all. Anything to add, Roger?
You know, you did a great job, so actually not.
All right, I'll stop unless there's questions.
I got just a couple questions.
Make it easy, make it easy.
Well, so there's road extension going on with this too. Is that the full frontage of the property, or do you know about how many feet of road extension there is here?
I'm not sure exactly what the footage is on the roads. I know they're going to be just north of the road that would be coming in there. And so I don't know, Roger, if you can speak to that.
Actually, that's been kind of in flux, and we're going through the engineering and everything now. It's not going to go all the way north to the property line. We're cutting that back a little bit now. And a lot of that's just to get it sized within a project that we can get to calc out and, you know, try and make some money on it. But the layout really looks good. It gets better. We did add the other building to try and get more massing. You know, you don't think that to try and get a better return when there isn't hardly one to add to it, you know, that usually doesn't make good math sense. But in this case, if you do lease it out or sell it, it does. So that's what we're kind of gambling on at this point.
I may also just remind the council so that you're aware of it. If you look on the redevelopment plan itself on page, I believe it's 5 pages in, you'll see the potential eligible public and private investments. Keep in mind that they have to not only spend those dollars, but they have to prove up on those dollars before the bond is funded and the proceeds dispersed. And so when they lay out $450,000 for streets and utilities, we will need to see evidence that they did in fact spend that, and that they spent the $70,000 for site improvement and make sure that anything that's eligible, we need to see a prove up on what they spent. And in the event that they would spend less than $610,000, the amount of the bond would be downsized accordingly. They can't get anything more than the eligible expenses from a reimbursement.
And the track that the tax increment will come from is just the 7 acres, right?
Yes.
So the future phases are just future vision. They don't tie to this.
They will be
bond,
back.
right?
They will be back for a separate TIF bond on the future phases.
Okay.
But again, they're going to have the eligible expenses to come up with as well in those future phases.
Mike, on the infrastructure improvements, excuse me, will those, I presume, will they meet the city standards, and will the city be overseeing the construction to make sure that the improvements are following the plans and specifications set forth?
Well, I would just say this, I'll let Jim speak to whether the city will actually, you know, that we're dealing with a contractor that actually has wherewithal to do it, where most of them we work with do not, but it will be at city specs because it is inside the city limits.
Yeah, it will be, Ed. It'll be the city specs, and we will take the oversight of it because they will end up dedicating that back to the city.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. This is a public hearing. If anybody else wishes to speak, now's the time.
Mayor, if it's all right, I might just have a quick question for either Jim or for Gary Pearson. Are we starting to develop any concerns about needing to connect this road or have another access point? I guess, how far away are we from that being an issue?
I have suggested to DEFCO, and Gary and I have talked about it on several occasions, and some of his predecessors too, that we really do need to sit down with some of the adjoining landowners there and come up with, I guess I would call it a master plan of what the street improvements out there would look like. I know in visiting with Roger there, they've got a couple of thoughts on that, and so we are looking at that, and it is something that needs to be looked at.
Is there a point where fire code or something creates that need for a second roadway due to number of square footage or number of employees or something
Well,
triggered?
Not so much that, but that's one of the reasons why we have a maximum length on cul-de-sacs or whatever, is because of the concern for those types of things. And so again, we'll be visiting with some of the adjoining landowners there and see if we can't figure out a way so that in the future, as this continues to develop, we'll be able to put together a master street plan, road plan for that area.
There's nothing looming right on our next step that's going to create some kind of road issue there.
No.
Okay. Motion to close public. Second.
Public hearing's been closed.
I now move that we adopt a resolution by the City of North Platte recommending approval of a redevelopment of the City of North Platte regarding the Iron Trail Industrial Park Project redevelopment plan of the City of North Platte property described as part of the southeast quarter of Section 15, Township 13 North, Range 30 west of the 6 p.m. in the City of North Platte, Lincoln County, Nebraska, and shown as parcel number 0023926.70 in the records of the Office of the Lincoln County, Nebraska County Assessor. Second.
Maybe just to share some math with you guys, I tried to figure out what this bond would look like if it was under our more normal bond structure with an interest rate. And if you ran a 5% interest rate, it's around a $400,000 bond or $425,000 bond, somewhere in that range. I think that's right, Matt, Mike and Gary?
In the ballgame.
In the ballgame. And so this is an interesting situation to me to have that zero interest rate. But I think if you think about it, it's probably better for the city, because if the bond was slow paying, the interest on normal bond would make the bond bigger. So actually, I think from a city perspective, that it's even though you could compare it to a $425,000 bond, it probably has a little bit less. The payment is very definitive in this, and so I think it's unique, because I don't think we've had one like this before in the community, have we, Mike? That's zero interest.
No, we really haven't, but it's not a bad model, because if you think about it, in most TIF bonds, when you run the math, you're getting negative amortization out the gate. You're going to those early payments that you're receiving that are coming back. You're going to go over a year before you get any tax payments at all. All the interest that accrues at that point in time, you'll spend the first 2 or 3 years, in many cases, just catching up the interest before you start getting principal pay down on the bond. But again, at the end of the day, it's a zero-sum game. Okay, we're not going to change the amount of revenues, okay, that are coming in. So all we're solving for is size of the bond and the interest rate, and those are the two variables. So it really doesn't really matter in the big scheme of things where you make it. You know, add an interest rate, raise the interest rate. You know, I had somebody ask me one time, well, geez, the interest rate's a great interest rate on those bonds. Well, the bond's smaller as a result of it. I'd also tell you that if that thing doesn't work and the taxes, if they don't get those buildings sold or leased, I'll guarantee you that the assessor is going to come back and lower the assessed value. And if the assessor lowers the assessed value and the mill levy's there's going to be less flow. If you get less flow, that bond's not going to fully amortize in 15 years. And guess who loses? The bondholder, not us. So, it's a good concept. It really works well. And at 6 one, half dozen another. I don't know that I have a strong preference one way or the other, whether there's an interest rate on it or whether there's not. It's just if you're a bank that would be financing it, obviously they've got the capacity to carry their own bond. But if you were a bank wanting to finance it, you might make sure you discount a zero interest bond appropriately if you're going to have an interest rate on your loans.
Well, why I paused for a minute to bring that up is because in essence, the bond looks oversized. It looks 50% bigger than it would be if we compared it to a lot of them that we've done in the past. And so I guess more than anything, I just wanted to pause to talk about that for a minute, because this bond does look more oversized than what it would be if we compared it to other ones we've done in terms of the tax allocation. If we compared apples to apples to other ones the city's done.
And again, the developer then has to make sure they've got enough eligible expenses to fully utilize that bond, because if they would come in and spend less than $610,000 in eligible expenses, we're not going to give them full bond. So they'll have to downsize it accordingly. So again, you got to kind of take it into consideration with how many eligible expenses you have. If I think where the CRA has been more concerned is we don't want to have a super high interest rate, which lowers the amount of the bond, which basically, if somebody says, I'm only going to have a couple $100,000 in eligible expenses, then what they'd be lobbying us to do is move the interest rate to 10 or 12%, so they could downsize the bond and still get more flow. So that's where you could probably get gamed. And that's why in this environment today, we would probably cap them at 5 or 6%. So there's more risk if their interest rate were higher than if the interest rate were lower.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
All right, item number 9, award of the North Platte Historic District nomination for the National Register of Historic Place project to the consultant RDG Planning and Design, and authorization to sign a service agreement contract.
Move that we award of the North Platte Historic District nomination for the National Register of Historic Places project to the consultant RDG Planning and Design, and authorize to sign service agreement contract.
Second. Motion passes. Item number 10, authorize mayor to execute purchase agreement providing the purchase of 2 tracts of real estate from Mid Plains Community College. 1 tract generally situated in section 16 and 1 situated in section 17, both in township 13 north, range 30, west of the 6th PM, Lincoln County, Nebraska, for the purchase of establishing city water wells.
Move that we authorize mayor to execute purchase agreement providing for the purchase of 2 tracts of real estate from Mid Plains Community College. 1 tract generally situated in section 16 and 1 situated in section 17, both in township 13 north, range 30, west of the 6 PM, Lincoln County, Nebraska, for the purpose of establishing a city water wells.
Second.
Motion passes. Item number 11, authorize expenditure of New Bern Estate interest funds for the purchase of replacement playground equipment at the East Area Storyland at Cody Park, not to exceed $185,000.
Move that we authorize the expenditure of New Bern Estate interest funds for the purchase of replacement playground equipment at the East Area Storyland at Cody Park, not to exceed $185,000.
Second. Yes, sir.
So, Lane, you guys haven't awarded this yet? You guys are just going out there and you want to know that you have this behind you to
Right.
secure bids?
We have 4 RFPs up for 4 different companies, 2 proposals each from those companies that are due here in a couple of weeks. And so we capped what the cost could be on that, which is $185,000. And so we want to have the funds available so we reward those then after that amount, which we'll have some citizens involved in that awarding of that for this, but that's, this is one of the steps for that. So we have RFPs out there.
And when is your estimation that you want to open new playground?
You may wish to come up to the.
Sorry.
Please.
Our plans are to award it and then start removing the existing playground over the winter, keeping the good parts of that to use on the other playgrounds to replace some things that are lower, and then put this in the spring. So, weather permitting, you'll be ready for next summer.
Thank you.
Lane, just a quick follow-up question. I want to make sure I understand. So is this primarily would be the one project is that, but yeah, I know during the budget hearing, we had a lot of comments about just where different playgrounds across the board, but you think you'll catch some of those as a result of this too?
All our playgrounds no longer they're old enough that they don't make replacement parts for those anymore, but they're all about the same era as what we'd be replacing. And so we'd be using the good parts off of that to fix some of those that need repairs, because that way we can use those parts to repair. And the long term then would be to slowly start replacing those as well, but this would at least be replacing those parts that need fixed on those, some of the slides and some of the tubes and things, and get them a little bit in better shape, since we can't find replacement parts for them, and then in turn start replacing those other playgrounds as well. Would be using the pieces from this playground would be replacing first to get some of those back up to snuff, and then replacing those over time.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure this has been taken into consideration, but
Mike,
some people may,
microphone. Thank you.
some people may think that we're spending New Bern funds for something that's disallowed by by the way we spend the funds. It's my understanding that we can't use those funds for maintenance of the park. Is that not correct?
That's true, Jim, but what we'll be using these funds for is new equipment. And what Lane's talking about then is when he dismantles the old system, he'll use those parts on other playgrounds.
Oh, I
So
see.
this money will
Yeah.
only be used to
Yeah.
purchase new.
Yeah, it was no big deal to me. I was just curious about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Yes, sir?
Can I briefly address
Sure.
council on this matter? Hi, Eric Seacrest with the Nebraska Community Foundation. As you talked about, virtually all of our playgrounds in town need replacement and upgrading. And as part of this, the Community Foundation has already awarded a grant for the first one of at least $5,000, not knowing anything about your specs, just to show support. And we work with a group called the North Platte Parks, Recreation, and Wellness Foundation. They are also interested in supporting the development of better playgrounds that meet modern standards and for safety and accessibility for disabled people. And they're interested in supporting this, including making the erection, the building of these things a community effort, using volunteer help and get the community involved with making our community better. And just wanted to advise you of that. There's a lot of people that believe it's time to start having better, safer playgrounds.
Thank you.
Pushed it once.
And that motion passes. Item number 12, approve collective bargaining agreement between the city of North Platte and the North Platte Police Employees Associated with terminal order of police number 33.
Move to approve collective bargaining agreement between the city of North Platte and North Platte Police Employees Association for terminal order of police number 33.
Second.
And that motion passes. Item number 13, approve collective bargaining agreement between the city of North Platte and International Association of Firefighters, local number 831 AFL-CIO.
Move that we approve collective bargaining agreement between the city of North Platte and the International Association of Firefighters Local 831 AFL-CIO.
Second.
Just comment, this has all been going on for quite a while, and you have both been involved in that.
Yes, I do the negotiations with the unions.
And that passes as well. Item number 14, approve collecting bargaining agreement between the city of North Platte and Nebraska Public Employees, local 251.
Move that we approve collective bargaining agreement between the city of North Platte and Nebraska Public Employees Local 251.
Second.
And that motion passes. Item number 15, claims.
Move that we pay the claims.
Second. Motion to adjourn.
Yes, sir. Depends on what on. If it's something to do with what we have on here tonight, you can.
It is.
Okay, sure.
I'd like to express my appreciation to Mr. Seacrest and the, I'm grateful that the community's taken action here to do the construction of part of this playground equipment instead of putting it back on government. I greatly appreciate the initiative that you've shown on that and the people that you're working with. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, just a reminder, we did pass out some information this evening. It should have been in front of you. We have a press release tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Might want to stop in if you get a chance and stop in. Oh, yes, and we have a work session. I think you got copies of that as well on the 14th. That will be beginning at 5 p.m. So keep that one in mind. Put it in your calendars and we'll see you on the 14th at 5 p.m.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Thank you, everyone.